Iraq's neighbours pledged support to improve its security. Just what could these neighbours deliver to a war-torn country? Can they really help Iraq? And how? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Gardar. A major round of international talks aimed at promoting stability in Iraq has been taking place in Turkey. But what will it achieve? The so-called Neighbours Conference, the third similar gathering this year, brought together countries including Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Jordan, Egypt and Kuwait, as well as the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and the G8. But the meeting was largely overtaken by discussions on Turkey's threatened incursion of northern Iraq to hunt down Kurdish guerrilla fighters. And delegates used it as an opportunity to discuss other issues like Lebanon's presidential elections on the sidelines. So where does it leave Iraq? Well, joining our discussion today, our guests in Washington, D.C., Ambassador David Mack, Vice President of the Middle East Institute and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, and in Ankara, Ibrahim Kalin, the Director of the SETA Foundation for Political, Economic and Social Research. And we also had Ali Ad-Dabagh, Iraqi government spokesman from Baghdad. Unfortunately, he had to pull out at the last moment. We had a bit of a technical issue. Nevertheless, welcome, gentlemen in Washington, D.C. and Ankara. Ambassador Mack, if I could start off with you. Has the conference been completely overshadowed and dominated by Turkey's battle with PKK fighters in northern Iraq?
I hope not, because there are, I would say, even more important issues on the agenda for Iraq's future. However, certainly the media here and media coverage has been dominated by this question of Turkey, U.S., Iraq, and the PKK. Today in the Washington Post, for example, there's a big picture that shows Prime Minister Erdogan, Foreign Minister Abdullah Gül from Turkey, Prime Minister Maliki from Iraq, and Condoleezza Rice. So there's been very little about the other issues that hopefully were discussed at this conference.
Ibrahim Kalin, assuming that Turkey and the PKK did dominate the conference, do you think it would have achieved anything in helping resolve that issue?
Actually, the Turkish side tried to make the case that the territorial integrity of Iraq is tied to other issues such as terrorism, fighting all kinds of terrorism coming out of Iraq. So I think the Turkish side was careful not to let the PKK issue dominate the meeting. And if you look at the final declaration and other issues, the PKK issue was discussed more in bilateral and trilateral meetings, actually, rather than in the large meeting itself. The foreign minister and the prime minister of Turkey met with Condoleezza Rice, with the prime minister of Iraq, with Khoshar Zebari and others. Actually, most of the PKK debate took place between these actors rather than dominating the whole meeting.
Ambassador Mack, how vitally important was it at this particular time for those neighbours to discuss those other issues like security, refugees, political reconciliation, and not only Turkey and the PKK?
Oh, I think it's absolutely essential. For some time now, Washington has been grudgingly giving up on the idea that it was going to transform Iraq and therefore transform the region in a positive way. And it's been very much focused on stabilizing Iraq as a way to prevent this awful downward spiral of violence in Iraq to destabilize the entire region. So I'm quite encouraged that Ibrahim Kalin, your guest in Ankara, suggests that there was a lot of focus on that issue of preventing problems from Iraq in overspilling, spreading beyond the borders to the rest of the region, because that includes not only a great refugee crisis, which has already impacted very heavily on Syria and Jordan, but could impact other of Iraq's neighbors, but obviously it includes terrorists, whether they're PKK or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, terrorists, people who came from countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait perhaps, Egypt certainly, were trained in the crucible of actual violence and terrorist operations in Iraq, but now could be very, very hardened terrorists going back to their home countries to destabilize the governments there.
And Mr. Carlin, do you think that Baghdad has been unable or unwilling to crack down on the PKK?
Well, the main problem here lies actually with the political situation within Iraq itself. In fact, the Maliki government is willing to do something about the PKK, seeing the pressure coming from Turkey and partly maybe from Washington and also from other Arab countries, but unable to do anything because the real actors in fighting against PKK terrorist elements in northern Iraq will be the Iraqi Kurdish leadership. On the other hand, the Iraqi Kurdish leadership is able to do something but not willing because they want recognition from Turkey, and as part of these negotiations maybe at some point they want to bring up the Kirkuk issue and find a kind of a final solution to that oil-rich city in a way that will allow Kirkuk to be part of Kurdistan, if not a full-scale annexation. On these two issues, the Kurdish leadership and Turkey have their own differences over the last couple of years, ever since actually the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Therefore, what is going to happen, I think, coming out of this meeting, and also remember the Prime Minister Erdogan will be meeting President Bush tomorrow at the White House. Probably there will be more pressure on the Kurdish Iraqi leadership to step up to the table and do something against the PKK. In fact, there was some encouraging news today. The 8 Turkish soldiers were released. The KDP spokesperson in Erbil made the declaration and announcement, which means that actually they sent a very clear signal that they had an important role to play in getting the soldiers and handing them over to Turkey. And maybe there will be more attempts and steps coming from the Kurdish leadership in fighting, I mean, maybe, for example, closing down some of the PKK offices and training camps. If these things happen or continue to happen, I think the Turkish side will be in a position to say that diplomacy has worked, the public opinion will be released somewhat at least, that diplomacy is working, and therefore there will be no need or ground for any military action.
Yeah, it does seem that something positive has been achieved with the release of those 8 Turkish soldiers. Now, during the Istanbul conference, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki was optimistic about the prospects of the security in his country. He said ethnic violence is decreasing. The civil war that al-Qaeda wanted to spark has been prevented. Iraq has overcome the period of danger and is stronger and more experienced today. Al-Maliki has also said Iraq has witnessed many successes, and 2007 can be considered a successful year. Ambassador Mack, how can he possibly qualify that?
Well, he's correct that there have been considerable successes in terms of the purely security indicators. Some of the most troubled provinces, like Anbar province, like Baghdad itself, you've seen significant declines in the level of deaths and terrorist incidents. On the other hand, there has been no equivalent progress in terms of national reconciliation. And if you will recall, when President Bush announced this military surge back in January, the whole objective was to give the Maliki government and the rest of the Iraqi political establishment some time and space in order to proceed with political reconciliation on a national level. So far, we haven't seen that. There has been a lot of progress. I mean, for example, along with others, I met with some leaders from Anbar province who were here in Washington just this past week. And in terms of local self-governance, in terms of dealing with terrorist problems on a local level, there is a lot of progress in various places to which the Maliki government and the U.S. administration can point. On the other hand, there's been no significant progress in getting constitutional changes. There have been no significant progress so far in getting an amnesty for former Ba'ath Party members that you would want to reintegrate into Iraqi national politics. There's been no significant progress. In fact, there have been setbacks in terms of getting a national oil policy that would assure that oil, instead of being an issue for dispute among the various regions of Iraq, is the glue that holds Iraq together as a nation.
Ibrahim Carlin, is public opinion in Turkey for or against an invasion and incursion into northern Iraq?
Well, those who are careful about these issues and know a little bit about these issues do make a very clear distinction between an invasion and incursion. In fact, the Foreign Minister Babacan made that point yesterday at the meeting here in Tehran, in Istanbul, and he said we are not after an invasion, we are talking about an incursion. In fact, even incursion is a little bit too wide. You know, what the Turkey side has been talking about is very specific targets, maybe specific operations. But the public opinion is very much in favor of something being done to stop the PKK terrorists attacking Turkey from Iraq. And in fact, this could be an opportunity to solve some kind of a lasting solution to the Kurdish issue. Even though there is this very high public kind of outrage right now, it's very difficult to talk about midterm and long-term precautions and measures. But I think this will give the Erdogan government a chance maybe to bring up this issue. And as soon as this specific terrorist targets issue is resolved, and we have some kind of a rapprochement with the northern Iraqi leadership and also with Baghdad, I think there will be a process where we can start talking about taking the steps that will be necessary to solve the terrorism issue in Turkey.
Ambassador Mack, you have already mentioned a plethora of issues that need to be discussed and addressed in order for Iraq to be stable. Just refocusing again on the issue of Turkey and the PKK, where does the United States fit in? Is the US in a tricky and delicate situation regarding its support for both Turkey and support for wanting a stable northern Iraq?
Well, it certainly is. It has to, looking back a few years, it has to be remembered that the Kurdish leaders of Iraq have played their cards very skillfully with the United States. They have been among the most helpful, most supportive of various American policies, and at the same time, this has enabled them to push their agenda for a much higher degree of regional autonomy. Obviously, on a very popular level, there's a desire for independence over the long term. But almost all Kurdish leaders in Iraq who have looked at the situation carefully realize that the regional politics involving their neighbors as well as Iraq are not going to allow that to happen anytime in the foreseeable future. On the other hand, I think there's been clearly a split that has taken place among Kurdish leaders. On the one hand, you have people who are far more amenable and have come to terms with the destiny of Iraqi Kurdistan as part of a unified Iraq, the same territorial structure. These are people like President Jalal Talabani, and his #1 aide, Deputy Prime Minister Barham Saleh, but also, I think, Foreign Minister Hoshar Zebari. Then, alongside them, you have people like Masoud Barzani, who has appealed to a lot of popular sentiment among Iraqi Kurds. And Masoud Barzani is very, I would say, almost feudal in his approach to politics in the area. He's primarily committed to not simply Iraqi Kurds, but the Iraqi Kurds in the area that he and his party have traditionally dominated. And so he has tended to play to the sentiment in the Kurdish street. This has been very unhelpful, and I very much appreciated the kind of analysis that we heard from Ibrahim Kalin, pointing out that it's a good sign that he has turned over or has managed to get the release of the captured Iraqi prisoners. It's also to be hoped that he will carry out the commitments that he seems to have made, at least verbally.
All right, Ambassador David Mack, I'm going to have to interrupt you just for now. We need to take a break. I'll allow you to continue, especially when we broaden this out in the second half. Stay with us. When we come back, we talk about a plan Iran says it could help resolve Iraq's crisis. Do stay with us.